About genome technologies. So we are going to primarily talk about two techniques. Uh, One is microarray. Now microarray seems to be relatively outdated these days. However, since a lot of data has been accumulated in databases, thousands of whole genome gene expression data sets on different species have been accumulated. So it's important to learn about microarray. And these data sets are still being used and analyzed for hypothesis testing. So the other thing that we will learn is the next generation sequencing. Okay, so when we talk about next generation sequencing, this is basically the principal idea of next generation sequencing still remains same, like Sanger sequencing, which is sequencing by synthesis. We synthesize DNA and at the same time we start monitoring the bases. However, the difference here is that we now sequence a lot of DNA fragments in a given sample in parallel. So the speed is the advantage in NGS. So, so these techniques have really revolutionized the field of genome biology. For example, microarray is being used for gene expression, of course, of thousands of genes for the whole genome. It is also being used for uh, chip. This is called chip, which means chromatin immunoprecipitation on chip. Chip means the chip used in microarray chip, right? So we can use microarray in a way that we can identify the binding of various factors and histone modification genome-wide using microarray approach. We can have SNP array where we can identify genome-wide SNPs. So we can identify the single nucleotide polymorphism in a given sample. We can also identify copy number variation. So over the time we will learn how actually we do that. In NGS, uh, we can of course do the exactly same thing that we are doing here. We can have applications of NGS which is completely overlapping with microarray. In addition, NGS has also allowed the evolution of various different techniques. For example, there is a whole lot of techniques to identify open chromatin, open or accessible chromatin, right? Accessible means accessible to transcription factors, DNA binding factor. There are a bunch of techniques here. For example, DNA-seq, we will talk about these later on, but I'm just naming few of them. DNA-seq is one. You have ATAC-seq. You have FAIR-seq, and so on. And NGS has also allowed, of course, you can do the genome sequencing, de novo genome sequencing, de novo whole genome sequencing. You can do the genome conformation capture. What is the 3D genome organization? And again, as I said earlier, so we could do the same thing what we did here. We can also identify various kind of copy number variation as well as genomic rearrangements and so on. We can do the RNA sequencing, which is similar to gene expression thing here, right? We can do that using RNA-seq. And the chip thing, we call it as chip-seq, and so on. We will learn in detail about all of these techniques. So today I'm going to talk about microarray. So microarray. All right, so we will talk about microarray. So don't get confused. In many places you would see the name as cDNA array. You will also hear about tiling array. Sometimes you also learn about there will be some name of a company like Affymetrix array, FE or Affymetrix. I shouldn't name companies, but still many a times you hear about these and then you get lost. What is this? Is it different from microarray? This is basically also known as probe array and so on. So don't get confused. These are different versions of basically same technique. The principle behind all these techniques is same. It is also called comparative genome hybridization array (CGH array), which is applied to identify copy number variation for CNVs. Tiling array is basically used for chip, right? So FE and cDNA array is basically for expression. Okay, so let us learn about the fundamental principle of microarray. So assume that we are working with two samples, two cell populations, two kind of tissues, or same tissue, but one is diseased one, another is the normal one. Let us say this is your normal and this is diseased. The first thing that you do is you isolate your mRNA from each one of them. So basically we are learning about cDNA array presently. This is cDNA array, which was the original discovery. cDNA array, which was the original, the first innovation, and then people have different version from this innovation. You convert this mRNA to cDNA using RT. So we do the RT here and we get cDNA here for the normal sample and the cDNA for the control or disease sample. Now objective here is to find out genes which are upregulated in disease condition or downregulated in disease condition. How are the gene expression levels different in the two conditions? That's the objective. That's what we do. We do the gene expression profiling whole genome at whole genome level using cDNA array. The next step is to label. So we do fluorescent labeling of these cDNAs, right? So for example, but we need to have in cDNA array, we need to have two different fluorescent dyes, okay? So in this case, let us say I have Psi3 here, which is of red color, and we have sci-fi. These are the name of certain fluorescent dyes, okay, which is of green color. Okay, so now we have differently labeled my control and disease DNA, cDNA. Now this is the final step here is to hybridize them. So we need to make a mix of these two. Okay, now remember cDNA is double stranded, right? So when you mix, they don't cross hybridize at first. So we mix this in equal amount. Okay, it has to be equal amount of total cDNA from disease and the normal cDNA samples. And then we take this mix of DNA and put it on a slide. So this is called microarray slide. So here is your slide. This is like a typical glass slide that you see in the labs. However, there is a fundamental difference. There is a big difference is that this slide has certain dots. Okay. Now you might wonder what are these dots? So the whole slide is divided into some kind of grids, and you have small dots all over it. These are the complementary DNA for all the genes of our organism. Okay, single-stranded DNA, complementary DNA, single-stranded complementary DNA for all genes. So this is imprinted on the, so this is imprinted here. This is using nanotechnology, we imprint all this single-stranded DNAs in each of the cell of the grid. So grid would be somewhat like this. This is your grid, and each one of them is having one complementary DNA. Now this will be full all over. Okay, if it is yeast, you will have 6,000 dots. So yeast genome can be scanned for whole genome gene expression analysis using just one slide. For human, you might need more, 10-12 slides. Right. So now this would look like this. Each dot is basically having this complementary DNA of a particular gene imprinted, okay, on the glass. Okay, so now how do we hybridize this? So this will not hybridize because this is double stranded cDNA. So we need to heat at some temperature to denature this DNA, whatever is the temperature, 80 degree, 90 degree. So we denature this at certain temperature so that this becomes single stranded. So until this is single stranded and temperature is high, they will not cross hybridize with each other, these two samples, right? So this denatured DNA, which is now single stranded cDNA, is now hybridized onto the slide. So we hybridize it. Okay, now hybridization generally is done at 37 degree overnight. Okay, so what will happen now? These complementary cDNAs now, which is single stranded, will be annealed to its complementary DNA, which is present on the chips. This is called chip, microarray chip. Right. So this part is the experimental part. Okay. So the next part that you will see is actually the computational part. Now what will happen after you hybridize it? After hybridizing, you need to take this slide. Okay. So this is your slide. Hybridized slide, all right. So this was having your all kind of hybridization, right? So take this slide and we scan it on a scanner. So you might wonder what this will be. This scanner is basically, there will be a one box and you need to put the slide inside, right? And then this will be of course connected for the various lasers, and there will be some kind of microscope inside. So this is similar to what you do in fluorescent microscopy, right? However, this will be custom made for microarray to look at the whole chip at once. Okay. Similar to this one, the concept is similar to that. So you put your slide inside here and then you take an image, right? And of course there will be a camera over here, right? So you take a picture that will be connected to a computer, right? So you have the scanner and then you take a picture. Now picture would look like following. Let's say this is some part of the slide. I'll just try to draw something here. So this is some part of the slide which I'm trying to zoom in, and there will be uh, various kind of dots over here, right? Since I labeled my sample with red and green fluorescent dyes, so if red was higher as compared to green one, let's say gene A was having high expression, very high expression in cancer, but was not expressed in normal conditions. Let's say it was some kind of oncogene, and we looked at the cancer as a disease, and then the spot over here would be all red, isn't it? This will be red color spot because, uh, sorry, this was other way around here, right? What is, okay, cDNA is red colored in the normal tissue. So cDNA here would be higher in the normal sample and low in the cancer. So you can think of a tumor suppressor gene in cancer which are down regulated in cancer sample, but they were highly upregulated in the normal tissues. There is another spot over here which was actually, let's say, equally expressed in disease and normal samples. So which means that red and green will be in equal amount. So if that is the case, then what happens? You get a yellow color over there, right? So this is going to be, I do not have yellow color here, so I'm just trying to make a white color, right? So this, consider this as a yellow color. And then there was another gene, gene C, which was upregulated in cancer or the disease condition, that will be in green color, right? So this is up in disease, okay? This is upregulated in normal sample, or down in disease, whatever way you perceive it. And this gene, which is of yellow color, I right now do not have the yellow color here. This is yellow basically, because equal amount of green and red probes were there, cDNA samples were there, so they will make a yellow color in your image. So this is no change, basically no change in disease and normal condition. So this is what you will see for each of these spots on the microarray, right? So this is the same chip, this chip. Now to give you the some sense how in real life this array looks like, the picture of this array looks like, look at this image. This is the real image of a microarray. Now what you see here is almost a very large chunk of the chip. What I'll do is now I'll try to zoom as much as possible. Okay, now perhaps you can see some order here, that these spots were present in some kind of grid, right? So you see some green kind of spots. For example, this one is green over here, these are greens over here, yellowish here, this is reddish kind of spot, and so on. So let me show you a zoomed in picture. Okay, so this is one small portion of the chip. Okay, so when you see green color spots like this one, it means that the sample which was labeled with the green dye, which is Psi3 Psi5, is upregulated, right, in the sample where it was labeled with the green dye. If its red is high, for example over here, it means sample which was having cDNA in red label is having upregulation of this gene. Okay, each spot is one gene here, one cDNA. Yellow means both of them are equally expressed. Both of the samples show the expression of this gene uh, comparable. Okay, so there is no change in expression in either in normal or disease condition. Right. So this is what the microarray looks like. Now, for the computational analysis of this, the first thing you need to do is you need to divide this whole chip into grid, right, equal size grid, and analyze each cell of this grid. For example, I'll try to show you some examples where you can have a very high background. So we need to take care of that. I do not seem to have a good example here. Nevertheless, so now the thing is, how do we get the numerical values for each cell? So the fluorescent intensity of each dot is basically the numerical value uh, for the gene expression of that gene, isn't it? Now, the thing is that you might wonder that a green and red might have same intensity. Of course, they may have same intensity. If they are having same intensity, then when you expose your chip to red excitation, you get, let's say, some value around 120 or so intensity value. When you remove this red excitation, the laser, you have another excitation for the green color, okay, green fluorescence, and then you again get 120, 122 fluorescence. It means that the gene was not having any change in two samples, right? So we don't do it once. This imaging thing that I mentioned, over here is not done once. You need to first throw a red laser, okay, whatever wavelength it belongs to, and then you need to throw the you throw the red laser, and then note down the values for all the spots, what was the intensity values, and then remove the red fluorescence, and then throw the green one, and then note it down again. So it has to be done independently, and then you overlay these two, superimpose these two images, and then you get this image, right? So basically you can have a separate readings for red and green, and then you can see how much. So you can actually divide the red signal by green signal to get the ratio. If red to green signal is around 1, the gene is not expressed differentially, right? If it is positive, it means it is highly expressed in the sample where the cDNA was labeled in red color. If it is less than 1, then it is highly expressed in sample where it was labeled with green dye. So red by green ratio. Generally we take red by green ratio in log 2 scale so that the positive value means higher expression in the sample where it is red, and negative value means the down regulation in the same sample. So I'll show you how we actually do that. So the first thing that we need to do is uh, we need to take so we have to do some image analysis, some fundamental image analysis. For example, uh, let me try to draw one example over here. Let's say I looked into one cell. I'm just looking into one cell right now. This is one square, one cell of the grid, and there was some greenish signal out there. right? Now let us say there was some background level of signal over here also, right? So this is called background signal. So what you do is basically you take right in the center what the signal is. Let us say I decided that I will take this part over here and find out what the signal is. Okay, so what is the signal over here? I will say that this is my foreground signal for the foreground, and this is my background over here, right? So you decide about the background, that beyond this is my just the background level, and you say this is my signal for the background. Signal for this. So your actual signal, net signal is going to be, your net signal is going to be your foreground intensity minus the background intensity. That's one simple normalization in your image analysis, so that you are sure that this signal is not affected by what you are seeing in the background of the cell. Okay, because of spilling over of DNA, or when you make the chip, and the companies are making chip, there's some spillover here and so on. The second thing is that we need to take care of lot of other technical artifacts. There could be a lot of technical variations, technical bias in the sample. One of those technical bias, so these technical bias could arise from anything. For example, so let me write it over here. And that could be of various kind. For example, one of them could be your sample preparation. When you are making your RNA sample preparation, your quality of your mRNA or cDNA. Uh, Dye labeling, when you label your cDNA. So this is one of the potent bias, the bias dye labeling. Okay, so right now you are using two colors, right? So we have green and we have red, right? Now let us assume that the red one is more effectively labeling. The efficiency of labeling through Cy3 is more stronger, is better than the green one. These are two different dyes, right? Two different fluorescent dyes. Let's say red one is good and this is bad. So then you will get more red signals in your microarray scanning, right? So we need to take care of these biases. What else can be the bias? You can also have bias during imaging process. If your image analysis was very noisy, you had too much of noise, these things will also not work properly. All right, so you can have a lot of technical noise in your data, so we have to take care of these. For example, let us look at, so how do we really identify, let's say let's look at this bias for the time being, the dye labeling, dye bias, which is called as dye bias, right? So let's look at it briefly. So let's say I got all the intensity values. So you might wonder what intensity values I'm talking about. The intensity values, so this, after image analysis, this whole thing can be converted into a table, right? Where this is a numerical table where I have value for each gene and each, let's say this is my gene A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, and then I find out what is the value for my, let's say, red channel. When I open the red channel in the laser, in the microarray scanning, what was the value intensity value I got, normalized intensity value I got for A gene and B gene and C gene and so on. And likewise, when I put the green channel on, what was the value here, right? So green was my nothing but the disease sample, right? And this was my normal sample. So in a way, I know the values, what was the value in my normal sample and disease sample, gene expression values in normal and disease sample. However, this is raw data, this is raw data, this is raw data. I haven't normalized. This is image scale, image normalized raw data, which has to be further normalized for the other biases. One of those bias that I discuss is the dye bias. Okay, so the first thing that we do with the data is we make this plot. This is called MA plot. Okay, we plot M on the y-axis and A on the x-axis. What is A? Is the average signal, which means that what was on log scale, of course. So you can either say it as this is log of the value in the red channel plus the log of log 2 generally. So this is log base 2 of green channel, okay, and divided by 2, right? That will be the average signal. Now this can be on the log scale. You can write it in following manner. So I say 1 by 2 log 2 R times G. This is same, right? Another way to write the same thing. And the log ratio is basically your log R. This is log 2R minus log 2 green, which is nothing but log 2 R by green, right? So there will be on the y-axis there will be a value 0 and all the values above this is plus and below this is minus. Okay, how would the typical data would look like on this scale? So it turns out that the good data, so of course this is here there will be low average value, high intensity value will be somewhere here, right? So at the low intensity value, total intensity value, you will have a lot of scattering variation in the data, right? This is just the stochastic technical and biological variation. But as you go towards high intensity values, you see that you will have very less variation in the y-axis, right? And now if you see variation, let's say I got some dot here, 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 here. These are really up and down regulated genes. We can't say that these genes were up and down regulated because of the low total overall intensity, right? But at high intensity value, if we see these dots coming up here, these are really up and down regulated. So one could say that one could have some kind of cutoff, let's say like this, and say that these are the values which are up regulated, and over here these are the values which are down regulated. Now this is the ideal scenario that data would look like when there is no dye bias. But what happens when you have dye bias? So when you have dye bias, what happens is the same plot would look like following. You will have, let's say, some kind of bias. What you see over here is that your dots are actually not aligning to the 0 value on the y-axis, right? It's telling you that in this case somehow signals were more biased on this axis, on this part of the y-axis. Why? Because this y-axis is what? R by G, right? This is log 2 R by G. So which means that you have more of green signal overall, okay, more of green signal overall as compared to the red signal, which is why you get a lot of dots over here. So now you might say that, well, these genes are basically down regulated or upregulated in a sample which is in green color. But that interpretation is incorrect, because the overall trend is going down, which means that you cannot have that many genes getting down regulated or up regulated in one of the sample only. For example, here it was fairly symmetrical, right? So now this doesn't look like very pretty symmetrical, right? So if you fit a regression line here now, not the linear regression, let's say the non-linear regression, Loess kind of regression, you will find that the regression line is like this, which is representing the trend over here. This is clearly telling that this is the result of the dye bias because of the green dye, which is efficiently labeling the DNA as compared to the red dye. Red dye was bad here, right? So we have to so one of the things that you can do is you can go back to your experimental level and swap the dyes, okay, to confirm this. But more often people don't do the swap dye because it is going to be expensive. You are going to repeat the experiment. There are computational way by which you can actually correct this, and one of the ways is that you fit this regression line. This is, let's say, this is Loess regression, okay. You can also use Loess regression, okay. Now what you do, you calculate residuals for each of the points here, right? Y residuals basically, and that residual is your normalized data, right, which will be divided of this trend basically. So how do we do it? So let us say if I write over here, what is my normalized m value, right? Normalized m would be my original m minus my the fit of this line, which is, let's say, C, okay. So the C is what is the Loess fit, the coordinates of this axis, the y coordinates, Loess fit, okay. So you subtract this, you get the residuals. This is nothing but your residuals, y residuals, y axis residuals, and that's one simple normalization. So once you do this, the same plot would look like following. The same plot will be converted to same plot would look like this. Let me just put a shaded area like this. So this is now your normalized M, right? This is called Loess normalization. This normalization is what? Loess normalization. This is very popular in genomics. There are various scenarios where we fit the Loess normalization, get the residual, that is your normalized data. For example, you can have gene expression values which is actually scaling to the GC content. So if you want to normalize your data due to for the GC content, you fit the regression and take the residuals. So we will see, if we get time, I'll talk about that. And you might wonder why GC content. In the composition analysis, you learned that GC content is associated with higher gene expression. So why to normalize against that? Now, GC rich region is also efficiently amplified in your PCR. Okay, they also hybridize more effectively as compared to AT rich regions. So they can be biased due to differential amplification, and for example in RT-PCR, or differential amplification in your NGS sequencing methods. And here the GC content might affect the hybridization. So you may have different hybridization levels for GC rich and AT rich sequences. So some people try to correct it for that too. All right, so let's move on now. What are the other methods of normalization? This is one of the method. Let us say there's another method now, which is a more general method. So in your data, you can apply this to your any data science problem. Basically, that is known as quantile normalization. So before I tell you about quantile normalization, you should know one fundamental thing. If you want to check if two distributions are following if two distributions are comparable, then what do? We can do one thing. We get the quantiles of your, let's say, sample 1 here, and I get the quantiles of sample 2. Quantile mean a small quantity of the whole data, a small fraction of the data. Quartiles means 4 parts of the data, 4 different sections of the data. First 25% and 25 to the 50%, 50 to the 75%, and above 75%. So 4 different parts. So what can be the lowest quantile? The lowest quantile is the one data point itself. Okay. So now if you want to get the two quantiles of two different samples, you sort sample 1, all the values. So the if you sort in increasing order, the first most value is your lowest quantile, and the corresponding value in the sample 2 will be the sorted sample 2, right? So this is sample 2. So if you sort sample 1 all the values and sort sample 2 all the values and write side by side. So maybe in your sample 1 the lowest value was 100, and then it was 120, and then 500. Okay, and then the lowest value was 10, 20, 35 in the sample 2. So you take in the increasing order both the samples and do the scatter plot. So you're going, if you get a straight line here, straight diagonal line, it means both the samples are following same distribution. Okay. However, any deviation from this line, weird deviation, you can have minor deviation that might be fine. Let's say a deviation kind like this, it means two distributions are different. There can be another deviation which can be another sample which is like this. You can have some scenario which is like this. These are all the colored curves here tells you that sample 1 and sample 2 have different distributions. White lines tells you they have same distribution. This is also used to identify whether your data follows a normal distribution or not. What you do, you plot your so by the way, gene expression data are not normal distribution, so they are log normal. So what you do, let's say this is your query sample. Okay, you take the quantiles of your query sample, your own data, and then you take the quantiles of uh, ideal Gaussian distribution. Okay, Gaussian distribution. Take any that can be simulated in using computer, and then find out if these two samples are showing straight line, then it means this sample was your Gaussian distribution, right? If it is like that, then it is not Gaussian distribution, and so on. Any deviation, any significant deviation from the diagonal line will tell you that these two samples are not same. Now the gene expression data, since I talk about the Gaussian distribution, is kind of a power law distribution. It looks like following. Gene expression data is generally like this. These are the expression values on x-axis. This is just the number of genes. It tells you that most of the genes have very low expression, right? This is number of genes here. And very few genes have exceptionally large expression level. This is power law distribution, may not be perfect one, or this is log normal. Log normal means they are normal distribution, they are Gaussian at the log scale. So now if you convert this into a log scale, the same data would look like a normal distribution on the log scale. That's why this is called as log normal. Anyway, let's come back to the quantile normalization. First we'll see, so when I say sample 1, sample 2, you can think of, when I say sample 1, sample 2, you can think of that sample 1 is your red channel, right? In this case, in the case of microarray, and your sample 2 is your, let's say, the green one. Okay, and then how can I normalize these two vectors? All right, so quantile normalization is a very easy one. It's not really difficult to understand. Let me just clear this. All right, yeah. So quantile normalization. So what we do is the following. We take our data, which is the raw data, and let us say in this case I have some values for gene A, gene B, gene C, and so on, right, till gene N, 20,000, 30,000. And I have my red channel here and the green channel here. And let's say there was a dye bias, okay, or there was a variation for whatever reason, whatever was the technical line. Now this is not for the, this is not explicitly for the dye bias thing. Any variation in two distributions can be normalized by quantile normalization. So mark my words, any difference in the distributions of two samples can be taken care by quantile normalization. So if you take two samples in data science and they do not follow the same distribution, then you cannot do any significance test between the two. Okay, you cannot do the t-test if one sample is Gaussian and other is log normal. You need to bring them into same scale and so on. So let us say the values were for the red channel, the values were for A gene it was 100, B gene the value was, let's say this is microarray intensity values, and for C gene it was 150. And the same thing, same gene was having different values for the green channel, right? This is 200. Whether there was a dye bias or not, let's not talk about it, but we need to normalize these. And I got to learn that these two distributions are different by QQ plot or by any other method. So for example, one of the simplest method that you can think of to check whether the distributions are comparable or not is the box plot, right? So let us say in this case I plotted the box plot and I got the following kind of box plot. The red values were somewhere here. This is my box plot. This is the median one. Okay, this is your median here. Okay, this is your upper quartile Q75. This is your lower quartile. If you understand what the box plots are, this is your min value, this is your max value, and these are some outliers here. Okay, now I learned that my green channel was having higher values, so my box was somewhere here. So it is clear that two samples are having not only, so let us say in this case the box was also having a different size here. So this is your green here. All right, so these two distributions are different. First of all, their mean or medians are different, right? So mean and median are different, and then the upper quartile, lower quartiles are also different. The shape of the boxes are also different. This is narrow, this is broader. So you need to normalize them. Okay, so now the question is, what is the first step? The first step is the following. We we have to sort this table, right? The first step is sorting. So now how would it look like after sorting? Now remember, the moment I sort it, the gene order would change. You'll see that. Let us say the gene A value, after sorting the first column, this is going to be 100, no doubt, that's fine, right? Right. B value, sorry, this, when we are sorting it, C would come first, right? C is going to be 150, and then comes B. So order has changed for first channel, right? Now for the same thing for the green channel, the lowest value is C. So orders are different here. Orders are completely screwed up now. And the second one is A, which is 200, and third one is B, which is 500. Right, so order has been changed. That's okay for the time. We will once we know the gene names, we can reorder in this particular format, right? That's not a difficult thing. So the first step was sorting, right? So let's write it, sort. Okay, the next step next step is to get actually the average of each one of them. Okay, so for each gene, get the average value of this sorted one. So this is going to be your average value. I'll put it in blue. So average of the first gene of the lowest value, this is not first gene, right? This is the lowest value, which is going to be 100. This is average. The average of the second one is going to be 175, right? The average of the third one, 500, this is 750, this is 375. Okay, now is the key thing. So I put this same scale here now, right? So now if I replace, now what I'm doing basically here, I will take this value 100, okay, and I put it for A, right? This is for A, and same one I put it for C. So in this case, both of them were 100, right? So that's okay. So average comes up as 100. So 175, I will wherever, so I need to replace these values now. So 175, I will put here, replace here, and put it here. Okay, and 375 would be here and here. So what my data would look like now? The normalized data would look like following. This is normalized data. My A gene will have the value 100, okay, and my C gene is having the value 175. My B gene is having 375 in the first column, right? In the second column, C is my 100 again, and A is 175 and B is 375. So what do you see here? Essentially what you see here, this is for red normalized, this is normalized green, right? What you see here, this is important here. The lowest value of this column and this column is same, 100, 100, and highest value of this column and this column is same, 375, 375. second highest value is also same, and likewise if you have n different values, the corresponding value will be same in the sorted order. Remember, now I'm not making the two values same. Okay, remember, first lowest value is same, second lowest or second highest, whatever you call, is same again, the highest values. So basically the two distributions are exactly same. Remember, I'm not changing the data. The gene orders are different here, right? The gene order is different. Since I know my gene order is ABC, I can always convert this back to ABC. So I put ABC now, and I put in that order. So A gene was in red channel was having the expression 100, the B gene was having 375, C gene was 175, and likewise for green channel, A gene was, I read from here, 175, B gene is 375, and C gene is 100. Okay, now remember these 100 were written together, but remember this was A gene, this is C gene. So now 100 is here and 100 is here. So the order is not screwed up now, right? So now this is my normalized data. Since the lowest and the highest and the corresponding quantiles are same here. Okay, the lowest one is 100, right? So this is the lowest most quantile. The second quantile is this one, which is also same. And if there are n different values here in between, the corresponding value will be same. So at the lowest most quantile, what is the lowest most quantile? The value, one data point. At the lowest most quantile level, we have the same value. So distributions are exactly same now. Okay. However, the relative difference of between genes are maintained here. So now if you make a box plot of this data, how would it look like? Box plot of this data, normalized data. So this data. So the red one is here. And green one is here with exactly same distribution. So that's, they are normalized now. Okay. Mean is same, upper quartile, lower quartile, minimum, maximum, everything will be same. So this is perfectly normalized now. Now you can do whatever you want with this data. If you make uh, if you make a if you make a QQ plot, which is quantile plot, what is quantile plot? This one is quantile plot, right? So if you now make the quantile plot, it would be diagonal, right, for red and green. Let's say quantiles of red channel here and quantiles of second green channel here. Okay, so this tells you that the data is normalized. This is quantile normalization. Okay, one of the important thing that we need to do in the gene expression analysis is to find out what are the genes which are upregulated and what are the genes are which are downregulated in a particular sample, right? So let's say disease versus normal. So if you have two samples, okay, so let's say I have generally people do these experiments in replicate, which means the following. I will not take one patient when I'm looking at cancer, right? So this is how my data would look like. Normal individuals here, let's say 3 of them, and the cancer or disease individuals here. One, two, three, 1, 2, 3, right? And these are different genes. So these are genes over here. And these are normal individuals for the, let's say, these are normal individuals, data for the normal individual. And this is the data for the cancerous individual. Right, so you can call it whatever. Let's say you say this one is your N1, N2 normal 1, normal 3, 3 replicates or 3 individuals, 3 samples. And likewise, this is your cancer 1, cancer 2, cancer 3. To find out if this gene is um, highly expressed in normal versus cancer, the first you can do simple thing which is t-test, right? Right, so t-test is what? Basically you take the mean of the two distributions. This is the mean of these three values minus mean, second mean, difference of the two means, and the divided by the pooled standard deviation, right? In a very simplest form, this is the equation for the t-test, right? And then what the p-value? You can get the p-value for this. Now remember, this has to be corrected, and in one of the class I will teach you about the p-value corrections. It's important to learn that. Okay, that's because we are doing multiple tests. We are not doing the gene expression analysis of the A gene. Okay, we are doing it for thousands of genes, right? So which means that if we get the p-value of 0.04, you might say, oh, this gene is significantly differently expressed in the two samples. Well, the probability of getting the p-value 0.05, 04 is also increasing as you increase the number of tests, right? So if you do multiple testing, your chances of getting a significant p-value also increases. So that has to be taken care. So we will learn, because it's a very general method applicable to data sciences and various different genomic analysis. So this is a very general thing that has to be taken care after we learn all kind of data that we get from microarray and NGS. This is too simple. So a little bit more sophisticated method is what we do, we plot this t statistics. So let's say I plot this t statistic that we get from this equation. This is your t value, right? For the expected sample, I'll tell you how do we get expected sample, and the t for the observed data. In the sorted form, we plotted in a sorted form from lowest to highest. Now let us say I know how to calculate this. This is what this t value is, nothing but observed one, right, for normal and cancer. Now to get the expected one, you need to randomize these samples. Okay, now you say your n1 is actually your c1 randomly, and you say c3 is your n2. Okay, you swap these columns randomly. You are now fooling the system by telling that I do not know where the normal and cancer samples are. You mix the columns randomly, okay, and then you get one set of p values. Let us say now you got a screwed up system where you have n1, c1 and uh, C3 as one set. For the normal, you fakely call it as normal. For cancerous, you say that your N2, N3 and C1 is your normal. And likewise, another permutation you can do, you can say that N3, C2 and N1 is your normal, and likewise you say C3, N2 and C1 is your cancer, and so on. You randomly search, and you can do it, let's say, 1000 times, and for each one of them you get your t statistics, t1, t2, t3 and so on, and in the end you get it for 1000 samples and get the average t score. That's your t expected. Okay, in ideal scenario you should actually, if t observed is same as t expected, which means there is no differential gene regulation, you should get a diagonal line like this. Any deviation from this diagonal lines will tell you that a particular gene was highly expressed in one of the sample. Okay, so for example, you may get a data like this. You got the, so this is the expected thing that as a random null we expect, right? If there was no difference between this and this, and of course in real life there would be significant difference. Let's say this is what you observe. This is what you observe, which means that there is a significant deviation over here. Okay, so that will be, let's say, some genes which are upregulated in one of the sample. You can say these are upregulated in one of the sample, and then there is significant deviation down here. You can say these are the downregulated genes, right? So you can say significantly downregulated in one of the sample. Which sample is will depend on what was your mu1 and mu2, right? So how do we identify this? You need to get certain cutoff around the, you need to get certain cutoff around this diagonal line, and above which you say this the gene is upregulated and downregulated. Now how do we decide this cutoffs? That depends on uh, when you do this random swapping, you can also get to know how many genes which are upregulated randomly in the swapped samples, how many genes are up or down regulated, and from that you can actually calculate the false discovery rate, false positive rate, how much false positive you can afford, right? So let us say you can afford up to 5% of false positive in your data, then your line, this cutoff would depend on that line. Okay, so let's not get into that. You can get this cutoff based on the number of affordable false positive in your data. Likewise, there are more sophisticated ways also to, in fact, people, so this has to be on log scale, otherwise your t-statistics will not work. T-test is meant for the normal distribution, and we know that this data is log normal, which means that you have to take this value on log scale. This data has to be on log scale, okay, log 2 scale, otherwise you can't apply t-test. If you want to take the raw data without log 2 normalization, your choice of test has to be different. Perhaps you would better go by the Wilcoxon test, Wilcoxon, or whatever we call Mann-Whitney U test, which does not depend on mean and standard deviation parameters. So your distribution doesn't necessarily need to be the normal distribution. All right, so this was the fundamental thing about microarray. So in the next class, we will move on to the NGS analysis and the associated techniques. I will also talk about the different versions of microarray. In fact, we can talk today itself. Okay, let's talk about different versions. So right now, we talk about the cDNA array. You can think of instead of taking the whole cDNA, you can just take a small portion of a gene. Let's say this was your gene, exon, intron, exon, and so on. You take certain unique region of the gene and say this is my one probe, and take another probe from here, 2-3 probes per gene, and you can put these probes. Either you take one unique probe, you can also have multiple probes belonging to the same gene and put it on a chip. Okay, instead of whole cDNA complementary DNA, you can put the unique probes belonging to each gene. You can have multiple ones. Let's say these two were from the same gene A. This is your gene A, but you know where your gene A probes are, where your B genes are, C genes, and so on. So it's identity of your probes and the gene on the chip shouldn't be a problem, because it's already recorded. Now you might say that if I have multiple probes and I get different value for this probe and different value for this probe, how do I take care? There are different ways to take care of that. One is you can take the average of the probes, or you can take max value of them, depending on the data that you get. Sometimes people think max value is better than getting the average. So you have to test your hypothesis. In the best case scenario, you have to test your hypothesis by both, and don't get deluded by uh, a particular measure. So, and this is called probe array or Affymetrix array, probe array. You might also wonder that why do we need two colors? In this case, I can just get away with one color, right? So what I do, so let's say I have two samples again, normal and cancer. So I take the uh, mRNA from here and cDNA and labeled cDNA, label let's say Cy3. One, this is now single channel array, and you can put it on a hybridize on a chip. You can do the same thing here with the same die Cy3 let's say, and independently put it on another chip. So now if you need to have two chips, right, two different chips. So you can use a single laser now. If you are looking at the microarray scanner, you can just use a single laser here, right, which is just the Cy3, right, because both of them were Cy3. So you don't need two channel arrays. So this is called single channel arrays. cDNA array is two channel array. So it's basically, and it could be your choice which color of fluorescent dye are you using, whether just the light intensity of any dye is fine for you or not. So basically you need to get the intensity values here. So color doesn't really matter in single channel, right? You can take any color. So this is again used for gene expression, and probe array can further be extended to something called tiling array. Now as the name suggests, tiling array, it actually works with the whole genome even for the non-coding regions. So what you do, let us say this is your chromosome, and I will just talk about one particular region of the chromosome. If you look at this particular region, this is the region, and what you could do is the following. You can tile this, which means that you take a probe, let's say 50 base pair probe from this region, okay, and then skip for 50 base pair, take another 50 base pair here, 50 base pair here. Whole genome, coding, non-coding doesn't matter, okay. You do it for the whole genome. So this is 50 base pair probe, 50 base pair probe. You in between you skip some regions, 50 base pair skip, just because otherwise you need too many probes, right? So now you take these probes, right, and put them on a chip. So you will have a lot of chips, you need a lot of chips now, right? And now you might wonder, why do I bother about the non-coding region? There is no expression over there and so on. Well, there can be expression also, non-coding RNAs and so on. But the original objective of tiling array was to combine it with the chip, right? Chromatin immunoprecipitation, which is a technique to identify uh, if you have DNA like this and there is a transcription factor binding, you can identify to which region in the genome it is binding, right? So there was a gene over, this is let's say promoter region, and there was a gene over here, right? So this is the TF. So what you do, you actually fragment the DNA using sonication, and then use antibodies again this factor, pull it down, and this sequence will be pulled down with this protein, and then you sequence this, right, in your NGS. So now we do this NGS and sequence this like this. But in the earlier days, what we used to do was, you get these fragments which are bound with this protein, let's say all the fragments bound with this protein in the genome, and then you remove this protein thing, okay, in a phenolchloroform method. If you use this, it will digest the protein, and in the end you are left with the segments to which your X factor was binding, right? So what you do, you actually put some adapters over here, universal adapters, same sequence of this adapter is same as this one, and so on for each fragment, and then you can amplify this using PCR, right? Each fragment you have to amplify so that you have sufficient copies to measure. So and then you can take this amplified DNA and label it. You can then label it and put it on this chip. Now you can quantify this DNA which is binding to a particular protein by looking at the intensity value of this dot, right? So this is called chip. This chip stands for chromatin immunoprecipitation. This stands for this chip, glass chip, microarray chip. So that's one application. Another application, popular application, is your CGH array. CGH stands for comparative genome hybridization. So instead of taking your RNA, if you take your genomic DNA, so instead of mRNA, if I take genomic DNA as my starting material, what will I identify? If the sample was normal, I will see the same intensity values throughout the genome, right? If I take this gDNA, put it on a chip, I will see same intensity value because I have 2 copies of each DNA fragment, right? However, for the normal one, right, if I take the cancerous one, this is your normal one coming up here. If I take cancerous one, there could be regions in the genome in a particular chromosome which are amplified, right? Copy number variation. There could be another region in the genome which is actually deleted. It happens in diseases and cancer. So you can identify if this region is amplified, you can see a higher intensity of that region over here, isn't it? Of course, this genomic DNA, you might say that genomic DNA is pretty long, you have to sonicate and make a smaller pieces of this DNA. And this thing would be depleted. All other dots were of same intensity because most often this is just 2n. This is, let's say, 20n here. And this is what this one over here is 0.5n. One copy was deleted and so on. So you can identify copy number variation using CGH array. Okay, so these are the main applications of CGH of the microarray. You can have CGH array, tiling array, cDNA, Affymetrix array, and so on. We will move on to the next generation sequencing and the applications of that technique in the next class.